Patty, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Oh, very nice, Asu. Thanks for inviting me here.
This is an exciting conversation, right? I mean, I usually say this for pretty much all of my startups, right? But this is generally a very, very exciting conversation, right? Because one, you've been a serial entrepreneur in many ways, right? When I was reading the brief, right, when I was reading about all the good work that you've done, it came to my notice that you were the key members of this the entire Gorilla Glass that sort of came together, right? And you were involved in that in a very thick way, right? And that intrigued me in a very good way, right? Not necessarily do we come across inventors, right? Inventors are usually people, who are at the back of things, right? Possibly a certain award brings them to notice. But this was exciting, right? And I think
Mhm.
you kind of now taking it further, where with Infinita, you're creating a backbone where that helps a lot of these inventors in the material sciences space go out and test themselves, right? Possibly you bring in a lot of institutionalization in the practice, which is just so much more
Mhm.
important, right?
Mhm.
And possibly that brings speed to the entire process of research, right? On a lot of occasions, researchers tend to essentially work in laboratories, right? They're working in that environment. There is limited access that they have towards the industry, right? And there was possibly
Mhm.
always a need for a player who could come in, who could one, of course, help them and guide them to improve their whatever work that they're doing, right? And also help them connecting the market, building a commercial understanding, right? And I think that's a very
Mhm.
unique position that you are in, right? That's because it becomes a very exciting
Mhm.
conversation.
That's
Also,
true.
the fact that you're in the valley, right? You're operating out of the valley, uh,
Mhm.
which is an added plus the way I look at it, right?
Mhm.
In some ways or the other, valley is always sort of define the terms of the game, right? And I think there's just so much to learn from that space. Given 2020 has been an unreal year, India is essentially
Mhm.
now becoming a large homogeneous market, right? There's a lot
Mhm.
more that we can learn from that, right? So in this conversation, we'll try cover all of that. But it's lovely to have you, Pradyumna. Uh,
Thanks a lot.
before we
Thanks a
start,
lot. Pleasure is all mine in this case.
before we start, Patty, right? I'd love you to give a quick round of introduction for all the good work that you've done, and we dive into our discussion today where we talk of Infinita, right? And some of the very key aspects that you're trying to sort of crack into with this initiative.
So thanks a lot. I think Asu, you asked for a introduction. It's just to say it in short. I'm I got probably too many degrees, right?
Right,
So starting with I went to BHU
right,
to do my bachelor's in ceramics. Then I came US to do PhD in
right,
material science. Uh, Worked for a bunch of companies before realizing one of them is basically Corning and Saint-Gobain.
right,
Before realizing that my calling is going into building companies,
right,
and so I went did MBA at INSEAD, and then came to the Bay Area to first acquire a company, make it profitable, and then
right.
go and found another company. And then this is the third startup that I have founded, and with pleasure, because it is something in a subject which is very close to my heart,
Right.
material science, right? Infinita Lab.
Interesting.
So,
Interesting. Patty, tell me this, right? I mean, usually material sciences, and when it comes to say engineering and ceramics, right? And I think that area as a whole is not necessarily very sexy, if I can call it that, right? Usually, and I'm sure around the time you were in college, and I think last roughly about 20 years, I think there's been this excitement and euphoria around computer sciences, right? I think everybody eventually wants to get into that, right? Not doing that and getting into this area, how difficult was it, right? I mean, was this a calling, or was this just going with the flow, right? A more sweeter accident when you look back. What was it?
so I would say that it started with sweeter accidents,
Right,
but I feel probably fortunate to be at the right place at the right time.
right,
This is the right time for this. When I graduated from BHU,
right,
everybody was going into software. That
right,
was hot, and up
right,
to like 5 years back, it was actually pretty hot. It is hot. It is still hot. A lot
right,
of new fields are coming, um, but now material science is also becoming an area where new innovations are coming, and most of
right,
the big innovations are coming in, like with
right,
Elon Musk and Steve Jobs kind of doing things,
Right.
material science is becoming hotter, with the
Absolutely.
SpaceX, right? And the
Right.
Tesla cars and batteries and EVs and AI and all this kind of equipments that you have to build around it. Material science is becoming kind of very hot because at the core of it.
No, interesting. I think also the fact that sustainability has just become so much more important, right? I think every policy that you look at, every political leader that you look at, right, across the globe, developing countries, developed countries, right, everybody is coming to the fore and talking about sustainability, right? I think large business organizations are now kind of waking up to it. I think startups have been, I think, startups have largely been about essentially about technology, right? Basically filling in gaps, making markets transparent with technology in some form or the other. I think SpaceX and a bunch of others have been an aberration, right? But I think it's good, right? They have brought in this sensibility at the fore of things, right? For I think everybody to become cognizant of it. I think this wouldn't have happened without the madness of one person, right? With this
Yeah.
becomes so much more important. I think also the fact, right, that 2020 has been an unreal year, right? It's brought in a massive pressure on the technology ecosystem, right? And that essentially means that we'll have to possibly start to re-engineer the way we are kind of doing semiconductors, chips, and something that is at the very core of what you're doing at Infinita. Patty, what I'd love to understand, how did Infinita happen, right? What's the construct of Infinita? I mean, when I look at the website, right, it very clearly says turbocharge your R&D, right?
Mm.
The focus is to fast track this, right? The focus is to bring lab level innovations to market much faster, right? And possibly the end to
Mm.
end play, right? A 360-degree or holistic play. Tell me a little more about the construct of Infinita.
So that's a very good question, I think. So you have asked. If you look at the software, right? The reason why software kind of exploded
Mm-hmm.
20 years back,
Right.
the reason was that it is very easy to make software, right?
Sure.
You can just have a computer and you can code and you
Right.
can actually do it. Other fields don't have that luxury, right?
Right.
So if you want to, let's say in medical field, you want to bring a new drug,
Sure.
when you brought the COVID drug, it was so fast, and that was a kind of miracle, right?
Right.
In 1 year, the
Absolutely.
drug actually, the vaccine actually came. All right. Same thing happens with material science. You need large equipment, large things to actually do the research.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is where InfinitaLab brings in ability to access the outsourced labs easy. So to sort of you it's kind of on a contract basis, just use the lab or the facility like on demand,
Sure.
and sort of use it, and making the process of accessing that very easy. So
Interesting.
when I say turbocharge R&D means I'm making for clients engineers, I'm making it very easy to access the lab resources or the expert resources that are outside to their organization.
Interesting.
And when that friction is gone, it is kind of like you have a computer and you can just code, right?
Right.
So
Interesting.
in the case of material science, it is like you design an experiment and you have to run those experiment, or you have to test those materials,
Right.
right? So if we make that part easy, it is similar to the fact that you can run a code, you know
Absolutely. Super interesting. But Patty, tell me this, right? I mean, typically when we talk of this kind of infrastructure, right? To my understanding, there are essentially either very large institutions which have these kind of facilities, right? And we're talking about sizable companies, right? Or we're talking about universities, right? Where basically public funds are kind of utilized to set up these laboratories, right? That's not just true for say one country. I think that's true pretty much globally, right? If you do not have necessarily a very thriving business ecosystem, a lot of these labs are largely locked into universities, right? US has had a culture of R&D, right? They've been a champion. They've invested very heavily, but that's not true for a lot of other developed countries, emerging economies, right? Like for India, we essentially, I think, a problem is that of too many, right? We don't have that necessarily the time required for doing say original research or supporting original research, and I think plus we work at a very low capitalized base, right? There are like a lot of those complexities that come into the game, right? When you talk of this infrastructure, right? How do you what kind of infrastructure are we talking about? Are we talking about university infrastructure? Are we talking about large infrastructure which exists in established entities, or are we talking about piecemeal infrastructure which exists, say, spread out across a region which could partly be used for activity A, activity B, and there's this certain synchronization that could come in and happen over a period of time. Where are we on that trend? I mean, how does that happen? I'd love to understand the process.
So you're right about the infrastructure. It is not only in universities
Sure.
and big organizations,
Right.
but there are independent labs.
Mm-hmm.
In at least in US, the manufacturing infrastructure is such that there are a lot of independent commercial labs as
Right.
well available,
Mm-hmm.
and also there are smaller labs available where they have bought, let's say, two or three equipment,
Mm-hmm.
and there are two or three people, the two or three four folks who are running those equipments, and providing only a very limited set of testing,
Right.
but yes, they are providing it. So it is not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily that. Now, in terms of across the world, I think you are right that most of these kind of commercial labs are limited to mainly in US and in Europe,
Right.
or developed countries, right? Or in Russia, these labs. But if you look at India, this
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure is not there, but primarily because India does not have this manufacturing base,
Right.
quite a big
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing base. Now, that is coming with the Make in India right
Right.
now. So there are a lot of things that are being built. There are companies that are coming in. There are a lot of semiconductor companies that are coming in,
Right.
and government is giving them a lot of incentive. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this nascent testing infrastructure is being built as alongside with it, because if
Interesting.
somebody is manufacturing any kind of chip or any kind of part or any kind of product in like physical product in India, they will need to test it,
Mm-hmm.
and they cannot do everything in house, right?
Right.
So they will have to go outside, and that is where this commercial labs will actually become more and more prevalent.
Very interesting. Patty, what I want to understand, right, is that typically when you talk of research, right, especially material sciences research, there are trendsetters in the game, right? Who go on to sort of fund this, and eventually this becomes, the research that happens, then becomes an industry norm of sorts, and so on and so forth, right? The motivation for a lot of these organizations, essentially, in a way, there is a certain culture of outsourcing that is coming, right? Not a lot of organizations that you come across have very large budgets when it comes to R&D. I mean, a 3% or a 4% budget of your top line is a massive amount of contribution that happens, right? I mean, you look at it, pharma as an industry. I mean, pharma essentially depends on a lot of this, right? But when you look at other industries, right, when you even look at semiconductor as an industry, there's a much smaller contribution which is going in, right? In
Mhm.
fact, for them, the thought process and the thesis is that, if there is something relevant which is getting built, we'll possibly buy it out, right? Or we'll license
Mhm.
it if it's an independent researcher, right? A lab who's
Mhm.
done something, right? And these are labs which are, like I said, the institutional labs, they're more continuous, right? They have the right
Mhm.
equipment, so on and so forth. Right? That's been the relationship. What's your sense of this? I mean, does with Infinita now coming into the game, right? You're in a way democratizing availability of labs, right? Do you think there is going to be a change in construct, which is going to happen? Many researchers are going to come in, which organizations can eventually come in and say partner, fund, buy out a lot of these research. What's your sense of it? What's the kind of impact that comes out of it, right? I'd love to understand. I mean, there are many questions. I'm trying to sort of put it all together, but
No, I think this.
I'd love to understand that.
Yeah, no, no, this is a very good question. I think this is also a very deep question you have asked, that you really want to see where this is going, you know.
Sure.
Um, and see what is, in the testing industry, there are, if you want to do cutting edge innovation, right?
Sure.
So Tesla is building a EV. Nobody has
Mhm.
built it before, right? They build it. Now they are trying to make it cheaper, right?
Yep.
SpaceX is trying to use, they are making a rocket which is made of steel, right? Nobody ever in their, like, in the whole history of rockets, nobody has made those kind
Right.
of rockets where they made it of steel. There used to be carbon fiber, right? So now when they are doing something very custom, very,
Right.
very new, they have to use tools that are
Mhm.
also have a very cutting edge capabilities,
Right.
right? Now, all companies, it is not possible for them to invest and hire people who can just, it is just ROI doesn't make sense.
Interesting.
you
Right.
know it is better to share the cost,
Right.
means have a commercial lab
Interesting.
where that commercial lab test, let's say, 15 different
Right.
rockets, right?
Right.
The 15 different companies rocket, right? And
Right.
they provide a specific service. So for them to stay ahead of the curve and stay cutting edge and keep that staff is cheap. I mean,
Right.
that makes sense for a commercial lab, but not for the companies like SpaceX. So
Interesting.
so that is the reason why it is fueling a lot of independent labs being made that have very cutting edge capabilities.
Interesting. Paddy, is it a fair understanding, right? I'm thinking while you're talking, right, and when you're making this point, right, is it a fair understanding that you're also bringing in the right kind of people around the research that needs to happen, or where these organizations want to? So there are essentially two ways, right? But it can happen, right? There is a researcher in an institute who's say doing his master's, PhD, whatever, and then he goes on to sort of say try, test, work, right? The other
Mhm.
way to do it is that when industry starts to feel the need for innovation, right, and they don't necessarily have the infrastructure or they're identifying the people. Where does and how does the matchmaking happen, right? Are you offering? Uh, I think the narrative is very clear, right? That you're building a backbone of sorts, right? But stakeholder engagement is also very, very important for the backbone to perform, right? And that's, I'm sure, very relevant for a lot of stakeholders that you have, right?
Mhm.
How's the
Mhm.
matchmaking process happening? I'd love to understand that.
So matchmaking, but you actually raised two issues, Ashu. I think matchmaking part, and also you have raised the issue of that. Okay, hey, fractional lab capabilities we are getting, right, on
Right,
demand fractional capabilities, but at the same time we are getting fractional expert capabilities,
right,
right? So a lot of companies, like not necessarily, even if there's a big organization, they might not have the right expert for something,
right,
and they don't need it. Like, why get somebody full time to do something when they can
right,
do on a consulting basis, right?
right.
And a fraction of cost. So that is very true in the industry, and that is something which we also have a network of consultant
Right.
or experts
Interesting.
who can give their, like, you need 20 hours a month, right,
Interesting.
to
Very
work on a
interesting.
project. Yes,
Right.
just come over. We can provide that.
Oh, very interesting. There's effectively a marketplace that you're kind of creating of talent as well, right?
Talent as
Is a fair understanding, right?
well.
Barry, now there's a very interesting point that you've highlighted, right? When it comes to this, when you look at developed markets, right? I mean, there is no denying that developed markets, the need for research in developed markets is very, very high, and I think India is kind of getting there. And I come to India question just a bit, right? But largely, when you're operating in a homogeneous environment, and the client behavior is very unpredictable, right? Because of the content and the influence that they kind of get. Um, you know, it just makes it very, very difficult, right? Research becomes a very
Mhm.
pertinent part of that, right? And
Mhm.
and you have no other way to but to solve it with research, right? And
Mhm.
material sciences, like I said, because of sustainability, because of a lot of other pressures, people are evaluating multiple permutation combinations, right? Possibly with better materials, their go-to-market also improves, their ROI also improves. It becomes a very, very strong process, an integral process of their overall journey of sorts, right? What I want to understand
Mhm.
is that when coming back to the original question, right? So now developed markets, people are very expensive, right? Because you're talking to
Mhm.
PhDs, right? People who spend a large amount of time, even consultants for that matter, right? A large
Mhm.
amount of time essentially in research, right? Developed markets tend to pay these resources very high. They're very valued and valuable resources, right? Um, Now, question number one is how sustainable a lot of this is, right, for organizations. My sense is for a lot of smaller organizations, this is not necessarily, it's not necessarily viable, right? Is how I see it. While of course, even startups and early stage business are well capitalized in US because they get paid a higher dollar, but even then, right, a lot of this money is coming in for growth. My
Mhm.
question number two is, right, does that also opens up an opportunity for you to look at emerging markets, developing markets, right? Like India, where the pedagogy and the pedigree is very thick, given the right exposure, given the right environment, and like I said earlier, democratizing R&D, which you are. Is this a massive opportunity which is in the making for a lot of these developing countries? I'd love to understand these two points.
This is I want to talk about, like, one of my friend who built a
Right,
company as a manufacturing company. They sort of have they sell these kind of, this merchandise, right?
right,
So merchandise is manufactured in China.
uh-huh,
Okay, they have an engineering team, so they have
right,
built a SaaS software around it that
right.
is in
Uh-huh.
Bulgaria, right?
Interesting.
And and they have the whole customer service in Philippines.
Right.
So it's amazing, and that is built pre 2020,
Mhm.
pre COVID era, right? So there
Right.
is a huge opportunity in the globalization.
Right.
Getting things you can pick and choose right now, and with
Right.
with the COVID, actually this trend has accelerated and it has gone in the right direction. People have experienced it now. Like,
Right.
but before that, let's say 2017, 2018, 2019, people were not paying as much attention, but this was already happening,
Right.
right? So there were a lot of smart entrepreneurs who took advantage of this globalization or finding the pool. Now coming to this, everybody thinks that, outsourcing is all about, getting things cheaply. Yeah, that is true, but it is only part of the story, or probably a smaller part of the story.
Right.
Bigger part of the story in this, or bigger opportunity, is actually the crunch of talent, right? There is a lot of talent which cannot flow into United States or any developed country, right?
Right.
But now with the Zoom, for example, you can take my interview,
Right.
but at the same time, I can actually build a team that
Right.
is in India or in Bulgaria or
Right.
in, and the point is that bigger quest is for talent.
Right.
Talent is the bigger thing. I will pay probably the same amount as I can pay in the Bay Area,
Right.
uh, but I want absolutely the best talent, right?
Right. Interesting.
That is sucked up by bigger companies, right? Fang,
Right.
right, or
Right.
Mang, right now.
Mhm. Very interesting. Uh, you've not answered the other part of it, and I know there are not necessarily very clear answers. But when I talk to you of India, I will talk to you about and actually India plus Asia, right? Because I think our tendency is essentially very very similar. I think our demographics are very similar. Our consumption patterns are very similar. So I'll talk to you about that in just a bit, right? But before that, before I do that, right, Patty, within the same sequence, right? Capital is very very critical, right? When you talk of research and development, especially on say material sciences, which could possibly take a lot more time, right? Now, like I said, right, when you're talking about large enterprises, a lot is at stake, and there are cash flows that can support it, right? There are other mechanics
Mhm.
that can support research that they have to sort of do, right? In what you are doing, like I said, right, kind of you're making it easy even for small and medium enterprises, right, to go out and actually try and test things, right? uh, while it happens or not is a different story, right? But you're this with fragmented infrastructure, that availability at least comes in. So if there is somebody who has a sensitivity, who's an inkling, right, and they want to go out and test something, you at least there's infrastructure now which is available, accessible, right? And that's essentially you are enabling in a beautiful way, right? Capital continues to be a challenge, right? I'm sure you understand this as a researcher yourself, right? And I think for any researcher, capital is the big problem. While of course you're doing that matchmaking at a certain level, there are a lot of these independent individual thinkers, right, and doers and engineers and scientists, right, who are putting a lot of this together. Is there any mechanics where you're supporting them with capital as well, that could possibly help them fast track, right? Because acceleration, like I said, availability of resources is one, capital becomes very important, right? Is there any way you're kind of looking at that right now, or that's a problem that possibly is going to get tackled later, given that
Mhm.
you're in an early phase of building this up, right?
Mhm.
Well, what's your sense of it? I'll understand it.
So, I mean, it becomes more relevant for individual, let's say, startup or designers, for
Right.
example. So you're talking about actually those guys. There are individual capacities. They have started their own consulting or their services where they want to test out something, right, which is material related. Absolutely, there is they are the kind of pretty big market for us, a big segment for us, and we actually help them out,
Mhm.
and for them we are very very relevant. In fact, smaller startups like that are 5% or 6% startups, and they
Right.
want to do something, they don't have a lab, you know
Mhm.
they don't
Correct.
have anywhere to go and test out something, and
Right.
they don't not necessarily have the expertise, so they are the biggest customer so far
Right.
for Infinita Lab services. So in a way, this is kind of fueling a revolution. Earlier, it was
Interesting.
like they were sitting there
Absolutely.
and they designed something and they had no way to actually test their product. Now
Right.
anybody can design an iPhone and would have a way to cheaply test or get advice on, or
Right.
somebody can build a kind
Right.
of a new type of solar cell design, and they can actually come to Infinita Lab and test it out at a
Awesome.
very low cost, because we will help them also get access to a right expert
Correct.
and test at a very cost effective way.
You're essentially, helping them navigating, chart out the entire path, right? And I think which is just making, we're actually reducing inefficiencies in the process, right? Which essentially
In
means
the
they're going to be
physics,
faster and more efficient, right? More targeted, I think, most importantly, right?
exactly.
Patty, 2020 has been an unreal year, right? Now this is a slightly nuanced question, right? 2020 has been a very difficult year, right? But it's actually, so we've been speaking about globalization, right? Across many subjects, right? In many ways, when it comes to say policy, economics, all of that, right? Flow of capital. But I think
Hmm.
in a true sense, 2020 has been a revelation, right? We actually entered a phase where everybody's connected, right? So when
Hmm.
we say talk of
Hmm.
markets like India, they're extremely complex, operate at many layers. Even they're connected today, right? The connectivity is very
Hmm.
self, right? The arbitrage that used to exist on information and awareness, right? On consumption of content, right? Exposure, for example.
Hmm.
Be it somebody sitting in the US, right? Say like yourself, right? Kids, family, right? Many other Indians, many other people with other nationalities, who are there in more mature markets, and people who are in home market, right? A lot of that actually reduced. Uh, Now, what that has done is that's increased the aspiration in a very different way, right? We want things in how, right? We want them at speed. That
Hmm.
essentially, and our manufacturing ecosystem is not necessarily calibrated for a lot of that, right? Which essentially means now
Hmm.
organizations will have to develop faster, right? What that
Hmm.
means is that the need for Infinita is going to be so much more thicker, right? Would love to understand what are some of the trends that you are super excited about, right? I mean, given all of this is naturally kind of played out for you, your role has become so much more pertinent, right?
Hmm.
What are some of those trends that you kind of are excited about, right? In terms of material sciences, right? Are there and the new materials that you're excited about, right? Because like I said, right, there's this entire change in market, the shift in market which has happened, and we're talking about sustainability as a practice. Organizations have gotten a little more serious about it. I think everybody's gotten very more sensitive about it, right?
Hmm.
The sensitivity never existed, right? So, what are some of those trends that you're excited about? I'd love to understand
Yeah, that's a very amazing question and very close to my heart. Like, what future, essentially, what you're
that.
asking, what future I kind of envision or I would like to
I mean, you
right?
possibly know what next iPhone is going to be made out of, right? Material, which I think we'll get to know only as a user, right? So I'd love to understand, those shifts that are
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah, I think the biggest, as you said, sustainability as is very close to my heart.
Mhm.
As the biggest, any kind of material or innovations that are happening, tech
Right,
innovations that are happening to make possible that kind of future
right,
is one very very close to my heart. In fact,
interesting.
I think so that is one. So and it contains like solar cell, right, which
Right,
is very similar to sort of semiconductor area. You
right,
know, batteries, right? Tech that is kind of reducing distances, right?
sure,
So that we can be closer to our family and everything, and we don't have to spend or so much fuel or to actually reach there, right? So
right,
that is, all those things are sustainability. Second, which is basically lookout. I think as a human being, a lot of
mhm,
fights happen
right,
because we don't realize that there is only one Earth, right? When
right,
there was a view, right, from the satellite took a view, right, and of Earth, which is just a tiny speck, right?
right,
When we see Earth from that perspective, then we realize that okay, hey, we are just a
yeah, yeah,
one human race, right?
correct,
Otherwise, when we are here, we are like squabbling, and that you are this or that, we are fighting over our differences. So
right,
what so that's why the space is very relevant to me.
correct,
I feel I'm very excited about what is going on. The
interesting,
second moon landing, right? 60 years it has not happened. Now
right,
we are very close to, many multiple nations are close to actually go and land on the moon,
right.
right? Or even Mars, right, down the line. So that is something which I'm very very interested in. Just the fact that the potential to unite the whole world, you know
Right. Interesting.
on that. So
I think Patty, the timing, like I said earlier, right? I think the timing couldn't have been perfect. We are I think globally we are in very uncharted territories, right? And I think, like I said, the influence of content is just so phenomenal. I mean, think of it, right? Facebook is now calling itself Meta, right? There are newer possibilities that are kind of emerging out of it, right? there are new world norms that are coming together, and that's just phenomenal. That's just so much more powerful, right? While of course we can continue to live in the metaverse, we will still be consuming regular stuff, right? But that will require it to be much smarter, and I think that's essentially what you are kind of evangelizing in many ways. Barry, towards the end of a conversation, I'd love to understand, for a market like India, right, or Asia in general. Now, when you look at these markets, these are markets that are not necessarily, there at par with developed nations, right? When you talk of, say, you know, purchase parity indexes, when you're talking about, basic requirements, right? I mean, we're getting there, right? We are working our way up to serve everybody better, right? Basic infrastructure becomes a challenge, right? But simultaneously, events like 2020 was also happened, right? Research is going to become just so much more important because of the fragmented ecosystem. So in a developed market, the ecosystem is still very, very continuous, right? It's all very discoverable. It's all very connected in many ways, right? In a market like India and in Asia in general, right? It's a very fragmented market, right? But this is also a market which is literally sort of peaking in its demand, right? Because the disposable capital is kind of increasing. Of course, there is a strata in society which is eating out of savings, but hopefully that is going to get better. A lot of innovation that needs to be done in material senses, right? Until now, we had the luxury of, say, basically something happening in the developed market, and then we sort of replicating in India, or we basically licensing it in India and then using it for Indian, say, diaspora here, Indian markets, right? A lot of that might not look the same. A lot of that might change, right? Because of our regionality, because of the cultural baggages, so on and so forth, right? Research requirements in India will have to be fast-tracked, right? Possibly a model like Infinita works very, very well. I'd love to understand how do you think about it? That's number one. Number two, what are the India plans? I'd love to understand that.
So I think the current government emphasis is very good on that. I mean, they have made a priority of Make in India, right? And there are multiple projects that are actually coming back. So you have to understand one thing, Ashu, that manufacturing, when you do the manufacturing, then basically all these services and everything, this is the ecosystem that actually comes. What happened in US, that manufacturing actually went away from US as well, right? Now it is under the threat of China, it is actually coming back, right? So not threat of China, but actually is a competence. They have to compete, right? And China can lock down something. So that's why it's sort of like, US is actually bringing back a lot of manufacturing. So new cutting edge technology manufacturing wise, like, Intel or TSMC or other organizations, they are building up new plants, multi-billion-dollar plants, right? In many places in US, right? So that is actually coming back. So in a way, US is actually in the same situation right now as in India, right? India did not have a base, but in US actually lost their base, like because China became the manufacturing hub for everything, like for the world, right? So now that decentralization is happening, as this decentralization will happen because India is going to build their own semiconductor or manufacturing base, US is building their manufacturing base, then these services, the accelerating R&D and other things will actually come in. It doesn't happen in vacuum. It happens when actually the manufacturing comes in.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And do you think, I think one thing which stands out, and possibly you're in the best position to sort of make a comment on this, right? When you look at, US market, right? Of course, capital problem is a little different, right? I think nuance wise, yes, of course, we're there, with all of this manufacturing driven push that is happening. But I think US is, my sense is slightly more well capitalized, right? When it comes to funding a lot of this research, there's a sensitivity, right? That also brings me to a question. And like I said, right, you're somebody who's in a capacity to answer this a little better. Is that when you were, so developed markets typically have a tendency, US specifically has a tendency to cultivate original thinking, right? And that possibly also happens because the labor is expensive, right? People tend to do a lot of things by hand, and that kind of cultivates them in many ways, right? We have the luxury of labor, right? And also we're a market of too many, right? Which means that, a lot of people have to be served, right? That does not necessarily, gives us the time to go out and innovate, right? What that essentially means is that we don't have that thought process of original thinking. We're like a cut, copy, paste in many areas, right? We just say that, this is already done, let's just implement it here. We're great implementers, right? We're innovators at execution on that front, right? But like I said, these are times that are different, right? Our students will have to be cultivated to think a lot more on the innovation front, right? Original thinking, like I said, has become just so much more important. The good part is parents have a very different kind of motivation. What's your sense of it? I mean, you're a product of an Indian education system, right? What's your sense, possibly a message, right, that you have to many leaders in the education ecosystem in India, right? How do they need to cultivate this sense of original thinking, right? I mean, material sciences is one, but I think in general, original thinking is just so much more important, right? What's your sense? What will be your message in that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think a deep question. I feel that necessity is the mother of innovation, invention, right?
Right.
So when the when the necessity comes, right? I think we have to understand capability wise.
Right.
Um, uh, Indians are as good as any other
Sure.
part of the world. It's just that the ecosystem was not there and is being
Right.
developed. So now we have to come. So you have to take the example of other countries, right? Korea, right, or
Right.
Japan or China. They did not. They have to build those capabilities. Now cars are being manufactured, or best cars are manufactured in Japan. There
Right.
was a time when nobody was ready to buy in its 70s or 60s. Nobody
Right.
was ready to buy cars from Japan, right?
Right.
They were considered weak and not good in US, right? Nobody will be helping them out, right? So, but then now everybody buys Japanese cars. Same
Right.
thing happens that initial what happens that any kind of manufacturing, any kind of capabilities, people actually copy things,
Interesting.
right? Same thing happened in China, same thing happened in Japan, same thing happened in China, right? So that will also happen in India. First, people will copy, right? And then when they do things with hand, they will become better and better and better. And then there will be people who later stage they will come who would actually build very original designs, original
Right.
things, right? So that is a process. In my opinion, the answer to question is that basically initially we have to copy. And
Interesting. I think that's a lot of that's a lot of practicality, right? Patty, what are the next 2.5 years like? Right, you're in a very interesting point. You're in a very interesting market. Um, the emerging economies are kind of literally ready for a lot of what you are building, right? The infrastructure that you're sort of bringing to fore. And like I said, in a way, you're weaving the world together, right? When it comes to
Mhm.
the world of research, right? What are the next 2 years like? I'd love to understand that.
Yeah, the it's very exciting future right now as it looks like for
Clearly.
technology sector. It's amazingly exciting, right?
Right.
Look at the kind of things that are coming in, right? Beautiful things, right? So EV, like think about it, like something that
Right.
has not happened for years, right? People are
Right.
waiting for this. And the whole, like, cars are electric right now, and
Right.
these are every company, car company, they cannot have a future, they cannot think of their future if they are only focused on cars that are gasoline cars, right?
Right.
So that's beautiful, right? That is one thing. Second, if you
Okay.
think about, like, the world is more connected, people have got a taste, right? It is, yes, COVID has kind of different things, but COVID has given this, that people have started working from home and people
Right.
are more free, right?
Right.
So that is kind of the future that we are kind of seeing right now. So it's very, very exciting. And then third thing you see about the space, right? Space is right there. Something which has not happened 60 years, that we have landed on the moon. We are going to another planet for,
Interesting.
right? Mars, we are going to go. And not one country. Every every country that can actually go, they are, have a plan for moon, plan for Mars, or, already landed there or trying to land there. So it's pretty
Interesting.
exciting time we are living in. And it is all culminated. It was not there in 10 years back. It is
Right.
right now that it is
But
happening.
I'd love to understand, Barry, right? I mean, I understand, all of what you're saying, right? I think there's this huge, we're at an inflection point, right? Everything is moving, it's becoming very, very exciting. And I think it just is a very strong, uh, proponent for all of what you are kind of building, right? Like I said, right, material science has driven research because all of these factors is gonna fast track, right? What I want to understand in absolute terms, right? And I know you might not want to answer it in literal terms, but what all geographies are we going to see you active in, right? You're largely in the valley right now. You have a backend setup which is in India. a part of your team in India, right? What do we see you get to, right? I mean, how many countries, how many people, how much of infrastructure, for example? I'd love to understand that side of the journey next 2 years.
So we are preparing ourselves for India. So
Interesting.
I think you're talking about, like, what is going to happen in India. I mean, whenever this infrastructure, as I said, the manufacturing would come and they will demand, we will be
Right.
already be there. So
Interesting.
let me put it in this way, that we will be there already in India, and we are hiring
Interesting.
quite heavily right now in India, because we
Right.
feel that the talent is right there. There's
Absolutely.
so many engineers that are coming out, and they don't want to go into traditional fields like software, right?
Right.
Sucked into that, they have aspiration to work with their hands and check out some of these fields. So
Right.
we are providing that career path to them.
Very interesting.
So, and when the manufacturing comes in and they demand this kind of thing, we will already be there. So
I think,
we're
Patty,
putting the groundwork.
when you're saying what you're saying, right? And I think through the course of this conversation, I think to me, your role has just become so much more clearer, right? And I think for a country like India, while there are people who continue to question make in India, right? And of course, we are a geography with a lot of complexities, right? But I think with what you are possibly building, we can actually service the world for innovation, right? And I think that's going to be a lot more thicker than where we possibly are, right? And
Mhm.
that could be huge in many ways, right? While
Absolutely.
manufacturers can continue to manufacture, but I think if we can really bring in that research mindset into India, I think we're a very different economy, right?
Totally.
And very critical in the power circuit, which is just so much more important, right? And I think that aspiration is clearly visible in the way you're kind of building all of these. You're building these, you're getting these pieces together. It's incredible to see that. Patty, my last question, slightly more cliched, right? But every founder has a journey, right? And this is for many founders who are going to be listening to this, right? But every founder, like I said, has a journey, has something or the other to share. It could be an advice, it could be a suggestion, it could be an observation, right? What would that be if you were to give it out to this larger fraternity of entrepreneurs, who've gotten super excited with what's happening in the last 1.5, 2 years, right? All the money flowing in, TV shows becoming very pertinent, right? Highest TRPs.
Mhm. Mhm.
Entrepreneurship is not a bad word anymore, right? But it's a difficult journey, right? It always is good to have pure learnings, right? It just helps you navigate better. It cuts your time to market, helps you improve. What would that suggestion advice be if you were to give one?
My advice would be same as probably the you know Mark Zuckerberg said that along the line, I forgot the exact quote, but along the lines of that any kind of risk you take is
Right,
not is worth, sort of what
right.
he said is the return on investment in risk is actually pretty
Highest.
good. And so 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 40 years ago, taking risk was difficult, you
Right,
know because the world was not so connected, and there
right,
were not such amazing distribution, and doing things were not so easy.
right,
It has become easier now, much easier, right?
right,
So I would say that
right.
take
Interesting.
risk and follow what your passion is. Follow and try out new fields, right?
Right,
That is what I would encourage people to do. And you will see that at least, even if you did not make money at the end, you will make up in the satisfaction
right,
that you live. The life is a small life, right? So we live only 60, 70, 80 years
right.
life, and that is not enough to just not take risk. So
Yeah,
take
I
risk.
think repent by the end of it, right? That should not be the case. Do it now, right?
Yeah, do
Patty,
it
on that
now.
one, Patty, on that one, listen, we're so happy we could do this, right? Thank you for doing it, right? I mean, it's late in the night in the US while we're doing this, right? But thank you so much for doing it. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us, right? I like I said, right at the outset of this conversation, this is a subject which has been close to me. I've had the opportunity of interacting with kids, across some of these research institutions in India. who are working on say improving the kind of cement, for example, that you're using, right? There are some who are working on ceramics for a variety of other applications, right? The unfortunate part is I have also seen these students, these researchers struggle for capital, right? For right infrastructure to go out and talk to the industry, right? They get lost in the process. I think what you are kind of building is just so much more important. And in a connected world, my sense and belief is that infrastructure like the one you're building is going to be so much more important because one, we become a responsible society. Second, our tendencies of consumption are going to shift very, very fast. What that means is that we'll have to be lean, we'll have to be very agile, right? Is going to require a lot of newer materials. And that's essentially, for that, we're going to need the infrastructure, right? And lab level infrastructure in universities, in large institutions, will not suffice, right? You'll need a lot of fragmented, ecosystem, right? Where, one could very quickly go out, do the research, have right people available, bring them and make them a part of it, and build products, right? There are going to be failures in the process, but then that's part of research. I think every failure leads into improvement, which is just so much more important, right? Patty, with that, thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure to have you. This is one of those conversations I've enjoyed thoroughly because I very clearly see that this is playing into that shift, right? This is going to be a foundational, stone brick in the new world order. So we wish you all the very best for this phenomenal endeavor that you put together. And I think this is possibly happening just at the right time. And there are many, many more miles to go, but it's going to be an exciting and a fulfilling one. We wish you all the very best. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thanks a lot, Asu. As I said, that it's a very mutual. The pleasure is mutual, and appreciate that you raised some very, very deep questions. So really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.